Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode Reading with Grandma. I'm going to just take a small break from our treasury of fairy tales. There's a few stories left in the book, but I was looking through my videos to see if anybody had requested any other stories, and although there were no comments, I noticed that there were way more views on my Thomas and Friends books than some of the others. And thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Be sure to hit the like button so then I know you watched it, but if you liked it or not. And so what I'm going to do is I have two more in my collection, and I'm going to read those today, and then I'll finish off with the Treasury of Fairy Tales tomorrow or the next day. So our first story with Thomas and Friends is Calling All Engines. It is Random House. It doesn't say the author, I guess. I guess they're all the same. Okay, Calling All Engines. Summer is a busy time in the island of Sodor. The engines love to show travelers around the island. They visit the seaside, the windmill, and the new Sodor Suspension Bridge. One morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to the shed. He had a very important announcement to make. A new airport is to be built on Sodor, and I need you all to help. The engines were all very excited. Thomas and Percy were coupled to freight cars full of bricks and timber to take to the airport building site. Imagine all the travelers, chuffed Thomas. And all the airplanes, puffed Percy. Then Ari and Bert arrived. Stinky Steamy's in the way again, mumbled Ari. Why do we have to work near them, grumbled Bert. This made Thomas and Percy very cross. They did not want to work near the Diesels either. The Diesels were oily and they seemed very different to the Steamies. Thomas, Percy, Ari, and Bert worked at the airport all afternoon. They shunted freight cars full of bricks and tars. The Diesels bumped Thomas and biffed Percy. Dirty Diesels, moaned Percy. I don't like them. Thomas and Percy had been so excited about working at the airport, but Ari and Bert were there, and now it wasn't any fun. That night, a hurricane swept through the island. It was the strongest wind the engines had ever known. All night long, the wind howled down the tracks. It tore down the trees and ripped off roofs. The next morning, Thomas gasped at what he saw. Bust my buffers, he cried. Look at what the wind has done. The seaside had been battered, the windmill was wrecked, and the Sodor Suspension Bridge had collapsed. Thomas felt terrible. Sir Topham Hatt came to see the engines. The hurricane has done lots of damage, he said sadly. Everyone will have to work even harder if we want to open the airport. Edward and Henry brought bricks to the airport building site while Diesel arrived with a load of timber. But the Diesels weren't talking to the steam engines, and the steam engines weren't talking to the Diesels. Everyone was cross. That afternoon, Thomas had to collect some paint for the bridge. He puffed up into the builder's yard to pick up the pots of paint. But Diesels were in the yard, too. Now I'll show Thomas who's best, Diesel whispered, and he gave the freight cars an extra hard shunt. Paint pots flew in the air and splattered down. All over Thomas. Thomas looked very silly indeed. Spotty boiler, ha, laughed Diesel, and he rolled away. I'll show those Diesels, Thomas huffed. So the next time Thomas saw Ari, he gave him a biff. And then Ari saw James, and he gave him a bash. Soon the Diesels and the Steamies were bishing and baffing, banging and being bashed all over the island. The engines were in a terrible mess, and no work had been done. That evening Sir Topham Hatt came to see all the engines. He was very angry. "You have caused confusion and delay. The seaside is still a mess, the bridge isn't painted, and we will not be able to open the airport. No travelers will come to Sodor this year." "No travelers?" moaned Thomas. "And no airplanes?" groaned Percy. All of the engines knew they had behaved badly, and they were very sad. That night Thomas had a dream. He was puffing along the misty mountain track, and there was Lady. Lady was a very special steam engine. She worked high up in the mountains. Lady was shunting trucks with Rusty the diesel engine. Thomas was surprised. "We always finish our jobs when we work together," puffed Lady. The next morning Thomas woke up. He had an idea. First he went straight to see Mavis. Mavis was a kind diesel engine, and Thomas knew she would listen. He told Mavis that he wanted the steam engines and the diesels to work together. Mavis agreed. It was the only way to get the airport open in time. "Let's have a big meeting with all of the engines at the coaling stop tomorrow," Thomas puffed. Thomas and Mavis went to see the other engines to tell them about the meeting. Thomas told Percy, Mavis told Diesel, then James, then Ari, then Emily, then Bert. The next day the engines gathered at the coaling stop. The engines whistled and the diesels were all lined up. Thomas blew his whistle. "Steamies and diesels need to work together," chuffed Thomas. "If the airport doesn't open, it will be bad for all the engines. Both steam engines and diesel engines need passengers and freight to be useful. If we all work together, we can get the job done," puffed Thomas. All of the engines agreed. After that, the engines worked harder than ever. They hauled bricks and timber and cleared away debris from the storm. They moved paint and tar and made sure that there were enough workers to each important job. And all of the engines were careful not to bump or block each other. Even diesel number 10, the biggest diesel engine of all, agreed to help out. Soon the engines were enjoying working together, smiling and joking as friends will do. Before long the airport was finished. It was a shining building and had a big tall control tower. And the runway was long and smooth. The engines were very proud and very excited. "I can't wait for the travelers," puffed Thomas. "And look," peeped Percy, "here comes the first airplane." So that just shows you, boys and girls, that when you work together, instead of fussing and fighting, things can get done and everything works out better. So I hope you all enjoyed Calling All Engines. Now we're going to read Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree. Thomas is a tank engine who lives at a station on the island of Sodor. He is a cheeky little engine with 6 small wheels, a short stumpy funnel, a short stumpy boiler, and a short stumpy dome. Thomas has many friends who work with him at the station. Gordon the big blue engine, James the red engine, Edward, Henry, Percy, Toby, and the fat controller, Sir Topham Hatt, who is in charge of all of the engines. The station is very busy, and Thomas and his friends have many adventures which you can read about in the series. The stories are illustrated using color photographs from the television show. So now we'll start our story. That was a little preview. Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree. Every Christmas there is a carol concert on the island of Sodor. The town band plays and lots of people come to sing carols around the Christmas tree. Afterwards, there is always a special treat for the children, and this year, the controller wants the party to be an extra special celebration. It was 2 days before the carol concert. The controller was very busy giving orders for everywhere to be scrubbed and polished, ready for the special night. The engines were all very excited. They had been helping with the preparations, and now Henry, Gordon, and Thomas were waiting at the station for the controller to give their final orders. "You all have jobs to do," said the controller. "Henry," he said importantly, "you are in charge of the cards, letters, and parcels. Gordon, you will bring the mayor." The controller paused impressively. "And Thomas, you have the most important job. I want you to fetch the Christmas tree. Duck will look after Annie and Clarabelle till you get back." Thomas beamed with pride. Sorry for the little delay. I just have a little bit of a tickle in my throat and I want to get a drink. Okay. "Yes, sir," he said. "Will we be able to sing the carols too?" "We'll see," promised the controller. That night the other engines sulked in their shed. "Why should Thomas go?" grumbled Henry. "He can't do anything a splendid green engine like me can do." "Nor me," agreed Gordon. "Anyone who would think he was special or something." But Thomas didn't care what they said. He had been picked for the most important job. "You are only jealous," he said, and he shut his eyes and went to sleep. Next morning, Thomas set off to fetch the Christmas tree. "It would be nice to sing carols again," he sighed as he puffed along on his important mission. Thomas had to go down the line through Edward Station to pick up the tree. The controller had said Thomas had to be back by tea time. Thomas picked up the tree safely and set off on the return journey. I mustn't be late," he thought. "The controller is relying on me." But it had been snowing again. Large snowdrifts lay ahead, and Thomas was not wearing his snowplow. He whistled bravely and tried to make his way through. He ran into a snowdrift and tried to turn his wheels, but it was no good. He was stuck. Suddenly the wind blew the snow all over him. Thomas was snowed under. Back at the station it had been snowing too. The workmen rushed off to fetch their shovels to clear a path for the visitors. The other engines waited for Thomas to come back. They waited and waited. "Perhaps he's stuck in a tunnel somewhere," suggested Gordon. Henry let off steam indignantly. "Pooh," he said. "He's much more likely to have turned onto the branch line. He could have run into a cow, suggested Donald. "Silence," said the controller. "We know that Thomas collected the tree safely, but now the snow has brought down telephone wires. We must assume that Thomas is stranded near the Edward Station." The engines all felt sorry for poor Thomas. "We're not going to leave him there, sir, are we?" asked Douglas. "Certainly not," said the controller. "I will need 2 volunteers to go and find Thomas." All the engines hooted at once. They all wanted to help rescue Thomas. The twins, Donald and Douglas, were chosen for the job. Quickly the men fetched the snowplows, and the driver and the fireman checked each one to see that everything was ready for the journey. Soon Donald and Douglas set off for the rescue. feeling cold but confident. Good luck, the other engines whistled as the twins left the yard. At the junction, they met Toby, Percy, and Duck. The fat controller had canceled all the trains until Thomas is found, said Duck, so take care. Come back safely with Thomas and the missing Christmas tree, added Toby, giving a final blast of his whistle just for luck. Donald and Douglas puffed bravely on, but the snow was getting thicker now. They struggled through Edward Station. Donald wanted to stop for a rest, but Douglas wouldn't let him. What if Thomas is lying hurt somewhere, he said. Great snow drifts lay across Gordon's Hill. Again and again, Donald and Douglas forced the snowplows into the deep snow, and each time they managed to move ahead slowly forward. Then they drew back and paused for breath. What's that? Hissed Douglas. I can hear something. Very faintly there came a muffled cry. Help! Help! Probably the wind, insisted Donald. No, listen, said Douglas. Help! Over here! Oh! It's Thomas, they cried together. Come on, said Douglas. Let's get him out. He must be frozen to his frames in there. The men began to dig the snow away. Thomas's driver and a fireman who had taken shelter in a nearby cottage came out to help. It was not long before they had dug Thomas out and the missing Christmas tree out of the snow. Thomas was pleased to see the twins, but he was feeling cold and miserable. The men coupled him up behind Donald and Douglas, and they all began on their journey home. When the engines arrived at the station, everyone gave Thomas such a warm welcome that they all began to feel quite cheerful again. The Christmas tree was quickly unloaded, put it in its tub, and decorated for the carol concert. There was a great rush to get to the station ready by the time the mayor and visitors came crowding in. Everything looked splendid. The controller stood in front of the engines. As a reward for all your hard work today, he said, smiling, you may go and enjoy the carols. Be quick now. Yes, sir, said all of the engines. Wheesh, said James, letting off steam because he was so pleased. The controller paused. Kindly remember that this is a special occasion. Be on your best behavior, and I want no wheeshing, please. The engines took their places at the carol concert. 1, 2, 3, boomed the controller, and suddenly, as if by magic, the station was flooded with light, and there was the Christmas tree decorated with colored lamps, stars, and lights. Then the controller shouted, 3 cheers for Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends, and everyone clapped and cheered. The engines were delighted. James was so excited that he let out a great wheesh. Everyone laughed, and this time, not even the controller seemed to mind very much. Suddenly there was a strange whirring noise. It seemed to come from the sky, and there, with his landing lights shining brightly, was Harold the helicopter. He came down gently on the snow, and out stepped a figure wearing a red cloak. Everyone cheered. It was Father Christmas, or known as Santa Claus here. He handed out presents to all of the children and thanked the engines for rescuing Thomas and saving the missing Christmas tree. Happy Christmas, Thomas, and to all your friends, he said. The carol party was a great success. Afterwards, Thomas and Percy went back to the shed together. It's no fun getting stuck in the snow, whispered Thomas to Percy, but it was worth it for the party. Happy Christmas, Percy. Happy Christmas, everyone. And there's Winter and Sodar. So I hope you all enjoyed our 2 Thomas books. These are the only Thomas books I have, but if you know of a title of a Thomas the Tank book that you'd like me to read, leave it in the comments below, and as soon as the library reopens or as soon as there are book sales again that are open, I will be sure to go and get some. Try to find the ones you're looking for. So again, hit the like button, leave a comment below, and I do apologize if it says comments are turned off. I'm trying to figure out how to get them turned back on. On some of my stories they're on, some of my stories are off. I have tried following the steps followed in the YouTube's guide, and I cannot get them turned on. So I apologize for that. And if anybody happens to know how to get them turned back on, try to leave it in one of the comments that are allowed. And I will check back every so often to see if there's any instructions. So enjoy, subscribe if you haven't yet, and ring the bell so you know when I'm reading again to your children. Have a good day, everybody. Stay safe, stay home, and we'll get through this crazy time we're in eventually. Bye now.